Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good afternoon. This is the second in a series of monthly webinars for managing and associate brokers, focusing on the Real Estates Council new regulatory resources that we'll be introducing in the spring. We're very excited to share the new format of RECBC's guidance and help you stay informed and up to date about the new regulatory requirements and guidance. Before we get started, just a couple little housekeeping things. Today's webinar is scheduled for about an hour, or it is scheduled for an hour, but we will be briefer, hopefully, than that, possibly. We'll try and get through it just as quickly as possible and maybe give you some time back at the end. Your microphones have been muted, not because we don't want to hear you, but we will go to questions and answers at the end. Just for simplicity, they're muted during the presentation. You are welcome to use the chat function to make comments, but if you do have questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen that you'll see there. There will be time at the end for question period, and we'll answer just as many of those questions as we can. Finally, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our website. Next slide, please, Sandra. So I'll introduce our speakers for today. First, I'll start with myself. I'm Carmen DeFoy. I'm a project manager in our education department, for those of you who don't know me. Also joining us will be Marty Douglas, one of RECBC's professional standards advisors. Just as a reminder, our PSAs, or professional standards advisors, offer confidential information services to real estate professionals and consumers. So if there's ever a practice issue that you're unsure about or a question that you might have about staying in compliance, please give them a call or send them an email and they can point you to the regulatory information that you need to help you clarify your issue. And finally, Tina Albrecht, who is our digital communications manager here at RECBC. Next slide, please. I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for today. So first, we'll be doing a quick project overview. I'll be starting that by providing you with an overview of the goals of the project, including all the key differences between the Professional Standards Manual and Brokerage Standards Manual compared to the new regulatory information and guidelines. Then we're going to move on to the regulators' expectations and practice scenario. So Marty will be guiding you through and talking a little bit about regulator expectations for how real estate professionals should use the regulatory guidance and professional judgment. He's also going to take us through a practice scenario to demonstrate using professional judgment and the regulatory resources to make decisions that serve clients and comply with legislative requirements. Then we'll see briefly from Tina what to expect in the April webinar. So she'll be giving you a little preview on the topic for the next webinar, which really focuses on the knowledge base, and she's going to explain in more depth what that looks like and the searchability and things like that. And finally, questions and answers. We'll start with just a few prescribed FAQs that we've heard from you and others already that we'll be answering, and then we'll open it to the floor for any questions that you guys might have. And again, we'll try and get to as many of those as we possibly can. Next slide, please, Sandra. So the project overview. So before we dive into today's session, for the benefit of anyone in the audience today who wasn't able to make it to last month's seminar, I'm just going to briefly review RECBC's project to revise the PSM and the BSM into these new regulatory resources. So I apologize to those who are hearing it for a second time, but I think it's important to go through it and understand the why and the how of what the project is doing. So on to the next slide, please, Sandra. So we have a new approach to regulatory guidance. Now, this doesn't mean that there's new regulatory guidance that differs from your obligations as a real estate professional. We're presenting it to you in a different format and a different way. So there's reasons we wanted to do this. The first is that it was time for an update. Real estate and the regulation of real estate has changed a lot, and the PSM and the BSM really haven't been comprehensively reviewed since 2010. It was time to take stock and remove some of that out of date content and identify the gaps that we had and where we needed to add content to make it more fluid. Our regulatory guidance really needed to align with the overall focus on using our professional judgment that we're seeing throughout our education program. In some cases, the guidance in the PSM was so overly prescriptive, it wouldn't apply. It was too narrow. You might have different scenarios, and we only touched on one small little scenario, wouldn't really help you with the issues that you were having and seeing in your everyday. The second was going digital. The PSM was originally written as a publication. Sorry about that. People read differently on screen. So when we moved it over to be completely digital, which it really has been for quite some time, we really needed those shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, more bullets, subheadings to make information a little easier to scan. Adding content to the BSM and PSM on a continuing basis really made it so much longer than it needed to be and hard to navigate. And some of those subheadings were identified as A, B, C, D. We were really running out of letters in the alphabet. So we needed to make it clearer, easier to read on screen, and faster to search for. And we also wanted to add an easy to use topic-based index, which we haven't seen in the past with the PSM or BSM. And finally, new resources. RECBC and the Office of the Superintendent really have been making it a priority to develop more focused resources for managing brokers, and new guidance materials include sections that directly address the information needs of managing brokers. Back in 2018, 2019, we really heard a lot from managing brokers around the province about how they wanted more resources that were focused on their needs in supporting them as mentors and role models, or role models and supervisors and trainers for their licensees. So those are really the three big reasons that we're taking this approach. On to the next slide, please. So interesting story. We found the the Real Estate Council of British Columbia's corporate office manual telephone survey report from June 1997. Yes, you heard me say that correctly. Telephone survey. So that year, we actually hired a market research firm to conduct 105 telephone interviews with a random sampling of licensed professionals to get their understanding really on the usefulness of the corporate office manual, which was an early predecessor of the professional standards manual. The recommendations that came out of that survey, so the kind of top things that we found and that we heard, were to make the index more user friendly, to provide instructions on how to use the manual, to make it more standardized, to use simple English where possible, to make more headings to the sections, to keep as up to date as possible, to ensure it is concise, clear, and easy to read, as many agents were really finding the legalese quite difficult to understand. And finally, investigate the option of maintaining updates from a website to reduce mailing costs and improve turnaround time and disseminate new information. So good news, it only took us a few years. We got there. So this project aims to really accomplish all those things. And we actually didn't find this survey until just a few months ago, at the tail end of almost the completion of the project. So it was quite nice to see that we were in line with what you've been telling us for some time. On to the next slide, please, Sandra. So the project goals. So what can you expect from the content? One of the project goals was to make sure that the content, as I said, was user-friendly. So clear, concise, and consistent. What we mean by clear, and the reason for clear, is real estate professionals are really busy people. You guys know this, I'm sure, and you want answers quickly. So we made it a priority to keep our material just as clear as possible. The subject matter is often really complex, and some real estate professionals are reading English as a second, even third language. So that we really needed to ensure that we were clear with what we were providing to real estate professionals. We wanted to make sure the guidance was easy to read. And so all the writers who contributed to the project really followed the principle of plain language. We avoid long sentences, complicated wording, and jargon, which you would often find in the PSM. Concise. As we said, the PSM was quite long and wordy. It included information that really wasn't regulatory guidance. So we removed a lot of the big, long examples and case studies and checklists that focused on those prescribed things and really captured it in a broader regulatory guidance sense, giving you really the best practice advice about how to meet your regulatory requirements, not just regurgitating what they were or what they are. And lastly, consistent. In the new format, the guidance has the same headings in the same order. So navigating through the new guidance materials will be a lot easier, more predictable, and faster to get the information that you're looking for. Next slide, please, Sandra. So another one of the project goals was improving online accessibility. So a little later in today's webinar, you will get a preview, as I said, of April's webinar, which will take a deeper dive into the knowledge base, and Tina will kind of give you a sneak peek of that. And again, the knowledge base is where you'll be going to find these new regulatory materials that we've developed. So search functionality was a big thing for us. We've heard from many of you that you find searching for content for the PSM frustrating on our new website. So improving the searchability of the information has been something we've been working really, really hard on in this project. Filters. We're updating the filters to new options. So for those of you who use the knowledge base now, you'll see the filters on the right hand side of the pane. We're looking at changing some of the names to make sure that you're really using them in a way that's meaningful, so you can get the content that you want quickly. And we're looking to provide more information on how to use those filters in our website. The filters also include license categories, so you can actually even filter by trading, rental, and strata, so that you're not getting bombarded with a bunch of information that might not necessarily be very useful to you in your everyday practice. And lastly, an index. So we're developing index pages to all the regulatory resources on our website by topic. So you can see at a glance all those different topic areas that are covered by the new resources, and really select just the information from that list that you're looking for. So again, later in the session, I don't want to steal Tina's thunder, but she'll be talking to you guys about that a little further. Next slide, please, Sandra. And again, the last of the project goals, which is meeting information needs. So our final goal for the project was really to clearly separate RECBC's guidance on best practices to comply with regulatory standards from the actual information that was explained in those regulatory standards. So simply put, regulatory information really explains the standards that are expected under the Real Estate Services Act, the real estate rules, the regulations, and other pertinent legislation. So when I say other pertinent legislation, things like the Homeowner Protection Act or REDMA, the Real Estate Development Marketing Act. The regulatory guidelines are really meant to give you the best practice guidance on how to comply with those standards, with those actual requirements. And then finally, some supplementary information does accompany both the information and the guidelines. So these things would look like the relevant forms, the mandatory forms you have to use, FAQs, checklists, maybe case studies that were included in the PSM currently that may have been tweaked or may have just been replicated into those supplementary information that link to that guidance and to that regulatory information. And then in a related project, we're also reviewing and updating all the subject clauses. So that'll be launched later in the spring as well, along with the regulatory guidance, both on our website and on web forms. So that it's a really exciting time. It's been a very exciting project, and we've really just done a quite a big facelift on the information out there for you guys. So I'm going to stop talking about the project now, especially for those of you who have now heard it for a second time. And I'm going to hand it over to Marty to talk about the regulators' expectations, the new regulatory resources, and using professional judgment.
Thank you, Carmen. And as a warning to the audience, yesterday in rehearsal, I managed to skip 2 or 3 slides, dance all around a couple of subjects. So they put me on a choke collar today. So if I appear to be going backwards or forwards, that's the reason. But hopefully we'll go through it as intended. Regulators' expectations. What we really are doing here is making the guidance more standardized and consistent. And the focus for the real estate professional should be to consult the regulatory resources available, to use the regulatory information to understand the rules and regulations, to review the regulatory guidelines in order to aid decision making, to act as the trusted advisors that the industry says we are, and finally to use professional judgment. The regulator, we as PSAs, can never anticipate every circumstance. It's not unusual for us to have scenarios laid in front of us by callers. When we ask questions, additional information comes out that changes entirely the focus of the problem and perhaps the focus of our response. And so that's where the use of professional judgment comes into play. Next slide, please. Professional judgment, what is it? You use your professional judgment to make decisions, and you use it every day, instinctively and confidently, hopefully. If we try for a dictionary definition of professional judgment, it'll be something like applying knowledge, skills, and experience in a way that is informed by professional standards, laws, and ethical principles to develop an opinion or decision about what should be done to best serve clients. Well, there isn't a test on this. We're not looking for you to be able to spout um, dictionary definitions, but we want you to be able to think about the 5 building blocks that go into professional judgment. And those are the 5 that are on the screen. Ethics. And I should add that despite my background as a trading service managing broker, that these scenarios and guidances that we're dealing with today apply to all license categories, including strata and rental property management. Ethics. We put ethics in the center because it's got a central role to play. That's why it's required as a course for license renewal currently. And if you'll recall the Independent Advisory Group, the IAG report from 2016, it was the #1 recommendation that ethics be embedded in the license renewal process. So ethics is concerned with determining which behaviors reflect professional values, integrity, honesty, and client-centered decisions. And you will hear us talk about client-centered decisions a lot because that is the #1 requirement of a licensee's duties, is the best interests of the client. To best serve clients, we just cannot ignore ethics and the role it plays in professional judgment. Knowledge. It's the second building block. Obviously, education and practical training. We have all acquired an impressive building block of knowledge, and that is the foundation for professional judgment. Professional obligations, #3. Real estate professions have a professional obligation to practice safely, competently, and ethically, as you well know. The 4th is client circumstance. And because it is a client-centered service, because the #1 duty to our client is to act in their best interest, we have to consider their specific needs and wants and goals. And we have to include client preferences into the services that you provide. One of the things we talk about is how shall we communicate? What do you feel most comfortable with? That's a client preference that we have to consider. So, as the commercial says, what's in your wallet? Only what's in your Schedule A? Experience is the 5th building block. It's not formally taught, but it is learned through an acquired background of decisions, work experience, ongoing learning, trusted advisors or mentors. Roughly translated, experience is good decisions come from experience. Experience comes from bad decisions. After all, we all as human beings bowl gutter balls occasionally. Next slide, please. Now, you see, this is where I went astray yesterday. I skipped this slide. So yesterday's audience are missing 4, 5, and 6. Luckily, it was a dummy audience. Analyze. What are the potential pitfalls? Do you have all the information and background that you require? Do you understand the duties owed to your client? And I'll be talking about reviewing that as the last step in your decision-making process later on. Consult. If you're an associate broker, you have the same responsibilities as representatives and associate brokers. Although you may very well have a greater knowledge than a representative, you should consult with your managing broker when faced with problems and decisions that have to be made. Managing brokers, obviously check with external sources, trusted colleagues, real estate counsel, PSAs. That's why we're here. That's why there are 3 of us. That's why we have a voicemail service, because we're very much in demand from not only licensees, but members of the public. Finally, the 6th step in decision-making is the decision itself, to look back on the building blocks of professional judgment. And at the point of time of the decision, be ready to provide evidence in support of your decision. Next slide, please. Document, document, document. Bears repeating. You may very well have to explain at some greater time in the future what you were thinking. And you know, if you're like me and you have trouble remembering what you had for dinner 2 nights ago, remembering why you reached a decision in a critical situation may also be a challenge. Documentation, recording devices, note-taking, diaries, emails, and retention and backup services for all those record keeping play a key component to your documentation. Accountability. I think it's a critical part of learning as a licensee, as a representative working for a brokerage, that the individual licensee has to be accountable and is made accountable not only by their actions, but by the structure within the brokerage where they are licensed. So licensees need to know that decisions firstly place the client's interest at the top, that conflicts of interest must be avoided, and that brokerage's policies and procedures must be read, must be disseminated, must be written. So that accountability may start with the brokerage and the managing broker in terms of creating and writing the policy, and disseminating it in a form that's easily accessible, and finally acknowledged as read and understood by the licensee. All forms a part of accountability. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Practice scenario. So we're going to have a look at a scenario that demonstrates in a simple format the use of professional judgment for decision making by consulting regulatory resources. This scenario that you're about to see is, as we said, simple. And we've selected it knowing that there are additional influences or scenarios that will occur in real life. These scenarios, additional complications to scenarios, may very well involve strata and rental property management. You know, proper notice given to a tenant. There's a special assessment being considered by a strata council. A real estate professional is sitting on a strata council. What responsibilities does that bring to bear into the situation or scenario? But those very important issues, for the sake of this presentation, we're ignoring as red herrings, if you like, because our intent here is to show you the steps that you should take and the resources that are available to you to exercise your professional judgment. Next slide, please. I told you it was simple. Your seller client has received an offer. Now, so what? Here's the issue that first pops up. Next slide, please. The offer is from a former client of yours, released by you, who is now unrepresented. You're going to have to assess this situation in order to identify and reduce risks in order to ensure the best possible outcome for your client and to ensure that you comply with all applicable real estate rules, regulations, and the Act itself. What do you do next? Next slide, please. Gather. Are you done gathering? Are you sure? You've got to gather facts, and that may take time. And I know that time is one of the biggest challenges for managing brokers, finding the time to make these decisions. Frequently, we're in the car going to another appointment or at home with our families when the telephone rings and there's an anxious licensee on the other end who wants an answer right now. So fact gathering is something you have to hold your hands up and say, stop, we need to get more information. Consider what details there might be that make the situation more complex. Your former client, as the buyer, you have to consider and remember that you have an ongoing duty of confidentiality. Confidentiality is one of the fiduciary duties that extends forever from any original client situation. And we're talking about primarily motivation, needs, or financial information. A former client from 10 years ago, motivational needs, I'm sure will have changed, not likely to be an issue. But a client who you released 2 weeks ago, you're very up to date on their motivation and what they're looking for and their financial information. And so these are the items you're going to have to review in your mind to make sure that they stay in your mind. But at the same time, you have a duty to act in the best interests of your current client, the seller, and disclose any immaterial information to him. And so there's a conversation that's going to have to take place between you and the seller about this past client and your duties of confidentiality. When you disclose that there is potential for a conflict of interest, that's one of your duties to your client prescribed in the rules. You're going to talk about what might come up as a conflict that you won't be able to reveal. And that, in all likelihood, is going to be something like motivational or financial information. Make sure that you have all the information you need in order to make a decision, or at the very least, all the information that it is possible to gather in the time frame involved in order to make a decision. So where do you get these regulatory resources? Next slide, please. Here's an example of what you will find in the knowledge base. In this particular scenario, we're talking about addressing conflicts of interest when acting for multiple clients. One aspect of that is in question number 3, understanding the risks of working with a released client as an unrepresented party. And a search of the knowledge base will have brought you to this position. Next slide, please. So as you look at that particular scenario number 3, you'll see that there is more information to be reviewed, that our guidance in almost every case will have other links and tags on the page that allow you to go further if your inquiry has not yet been answered or satisfied. So at the top of the page, there are a couple of links to agreement regarding conflict of interest between clients. That's the form that arises out of Rule 518. And dealing with conflicts of interest between clients flow diagram. The flow diagram is sometimes referred to as the dual agency flow diagram to determine or to avoid or determine if you're one of the few rare exceptions for dual agency. But it's of assistance in addressing conflicts of interest because that's what you're in when you have multiple clients. Finally, at the bottom of the page, there's a link to the FAQs on current and former clients. Next slide, please. Analyze. What confidential information do I have about the release client? Do I really remember anything that he said about motivation? Did they have any needs such as special schooling, French immersion, for example, in the location of their housing? Had they won the 649 recently? Those sorts of bits of information that would be key ingredients to your client, seller, making a decision. Am I sure I can work with the release client as an unrepresented party, considering the knowledge, my knowledge of their motivations, financial needs, timelines? Am I sure I can work with them? Am I, and the important aspect of that is, will the released client, the unrepresented released client, believe that you are honoring your duty of confidentiality and acting only in the interests of your seller, and not slipping, and that you're not slipping into agency, unintended agency representation of the release client. And that leads to making sure that the release client understands informed consent, and that I am not able to act in their interest in the transaction. Next slide, please. Consult. You don't have to make a decision alone. You're not in this alone. There are a lot of resources available to licensees and to managing brokers. Licensees going up the food chain, obviously the managing broker is the best resource. And it's important that you are available to consult, and that your licensees are not resistant or afraid of consulting for fear that you may discipline them or think less of them because they've asked a question. Managing brokers obviously can consult with PSAs. As I said, we are in a constant state of communication, both by telephone and email, around the province with managing brokers, but also with consumers. And managing brokers and trading services obviously make up the highest percentage of our calls, but obviously we represent the 26,000 licensees in the province. Several thousands of them are in residential property management, rental property management, I should say, and also strata property management. And so PSAs are there for all categories of license. Sometimes you have to consult a real estate board, and remember to consult the real estate board, because they may have rules that have an impact on the regulatory side. I'm thinking specifically of multiple offer situations where we as a regulator will instruct you on, yes, you have to present all offers received unless it's contrary to the instructions of your seller. But in a multiple offer situation, the real estate boards may have created rules for the conduct of licensees within a multiple offer scenario. So in circumstances like that, that's where to consult. The residential tenancy branch is another good resource for managing brokers, whether you're in rental property management or not, as a resource for hearings. For example, reminding licensees what the proper delivery of notice is. So that's another source to consult. Next slide, please. Last step, decision. This quote from Gordon Graham seems particularly appropriate and visual. I think we've all been in situations where the person tasked with the final decision has waffled or changed their mind or been persuaded to alter their decision and experience the disaster that can follow under those circumstances. Sometimes even a bad decision is better than no decision at all. So decision making does mean that you have to rely on your professional judgment and that you will be accountable for the actions that you take or that your real estate professionals under your care, custody, and control take. And if you're looking for a final review before you make that decision, if you're weighing two options, then I would suggest you look at part 3 of the rules and have a look at your duties to your client and see if there's something there that says, oh yes, this is the direction I should be going in. Am I acting in the best interest of the client? Am I acting in accordance with the lawful instruction of the client? Maybe the client instructed me to present offers at any time, excuse me, as opposed to presenting offers at a future date. Have I advised the client to get professional advice about whether or not the GST is included? Because that's certainly not my expertise and I shouldn't be offering that opinion. Have I disclosed all the information that's material? Have I done the research on the property if I'm acting for a client buyer? So these are all things that are aspects of the rules that may just assist you in making that final decision. Next slide, please. Document. 50 years of real estate experience here, actually 51 at the end of March. Needless to say, I have thousands of notes in tens of well, I don't know how many diaries, lots of them. But I only have one court exhibit from those diaries. And that's a court page that I actually framed. It's a diary page and it has a simple notation on it, lunch with Al. And that notation assisted our client in winning a court case against a lawsuit for a substantial amount of money. So you never know what little thing is going to tip the balance in favor of your client or in favor of you if you're defending your reputation. So do document, record it so you can always explain it and be prepared in a variety of environments to provide evidence-based rationale. Why did you make this decision, Mr. Douglas? They say in court. You want to be able to defend that, and you may very well need to defend it with reference to the research that you did. So thank you for your attention. And now I think we're shifting to Tina for a preview of the April webinar. Tina?
Thanks, Marty. So what are we going to focus on for next month's webinar? Sandra, next slide, please. Thank you. As you guys are all aware, we're making changes to the knowledge base section of the website. And to make sure that you have access to the guidance that you need quickly and easily. And next month, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into those new materials to ensure that everyone has had an opportunity to learn about the changes in approach. Our session is going to include a preview of the knowledge base, where we'll look at the new regulatory resources, things like the clause page, the new index page, which I'm going to give you a little preview of in a minute, and just kind of like a deeper look at how all of the resources come together, how the search function works, how the filters work, and how you can navigate through all of the different pieces of content that are going to be in the knowledge base. And look forward in your inbox to an invitation to this webinar. This should be coming in next week's issue of Broker's Brief. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who volunteered to give their feedback and participate in user testing sessions for the knowledge base. Your feedback has been really helpful. The experience that you have as managing brokers, the types of content that you're looking for, it's been very helpful for us to learn about how you like to use the information that we have, and it's helped us to refine the search engine. So thank you so much for taking the time to go through the user testing sessions with me. Next slide, please, Sandra. So this is a screenshot of the knowledge base homepage. And one of the things that you'll notice is new. I've circled it in green just so you can really see it. It's a section that's called Browse by Topic. And this is going to take you to a new index page that we've created. If we can move to the next slide. So this is a landing page, and I couldn't fit it all onto one slide, so you get a little cross section of it. But this is a landing page that has a list of all of the topics that are covered in the new regulatory guidelines and resources that we have created. And you'll see the little plus symbol circled in green. And next slide, please, Sandra. If you were to click on that plus symbol, what it would do is open up that section, for example, here on agency. And this is going to be a really helpful tool for everyone as they're beginning to learn more about what as you're learning which topics have information, what kind of information is presented in the different regulatory guidelines. It'll give you a summary of the type of information, the high-level overview of what you're going to find in those 2 pages. And then you can select whether you're looking for the regulatory information or the regulatory guidelines. And then when you click on it, it'll take you off to those specific pages. So it's just a really, it's a way to help you get that high-level overview of what is going to be in the new knowledge base. And Carmen, I'm going to pass the virtual mic back over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Tina. Okay, we're going to go just through a couple quick FAQs that we've actually had brought to our attention previously. So I'm going to just quickly answer those for you, and then we'll go out to the audience for any questions that you guys might have. So next slide, please. So the question is, when real estate professionals at my brokerage ask questions that are new and unfamiliar, what steps should I take? And so the answer to that, the regulatory information and guidelines are available in the knowledge base. The new resources, including managing broker considerations, which are contained within each of the practice guide or regulatory guidelines, and relevant cases to assist you in your decision making. Professional standards advisors, of course, are always available to provide information and respond to practice inquiries. Next question, please. With all the changes coming, what does this mean for us as managing brokers? So it means that you're going to need to inform the real estate professionals at your brokerage about these changes, ensuring that they are well versed. Create robust policies and procedures for your brokerage. You know, we are relying on you as managing brokers really to disseminate the information to your real estate professionals so that they can start getting an easy sense of using the materials that are out there for them to use in their everyday. And the next question. Given the focus on critical thinking and using professional judgment, is this now being taught in RECBC's education courses? And the answer to that, yes. So one of the purposes of this project was really to ensure actually that the regulatory information and regulatory guidelines were following what we call the continuum of education. So you're really seeing a similar look and feel in our education all the way from pre-licensing to this regulatory information and the regulatory guidelines. We want that consistency, and that's really what we're aiming and striving to achieve. So it's certainly in line with what we're seeing in the rest of our continuing education courses, applied practice course, and pre-licensing course. So I will turn it over to you guys if there are any questions at all for us. Maybe Tracy, if you don't mind letting me know. I'm not going to go into the Q&A. I'll let Tracy take care of that for us and let us know if there are any questions.
Yeah, sure. There's good afternoon, everybody. There's one here from Tom Garvey, and he's asked, will the council's real estate rules be available as a PDF? This would be ideal for Supreme Court cases where the court needs to understand the rules that licensees are required to comply with.
Great, Tom. You know, I think I'm going to pass that one over to Tina. I don't believe they are on our website, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So Tina, do you mind fielding that one?
Yeah, so the rules currently are not available as a PDF. And at present, we don't have any plans to make them available as a PDF. If you need to specifically design it as a PDF, but you can create a PDF from the web page content if it's something that you need to document and kind of include in your court case. I think it depends on the browser that you're using, but you can use the print function to print to a PDF as opposed to printing it to a printer. That's kind of a...
And I'll just chime in on that. As someone who has been caught using old material when there was more current material available, I want to warn against creating something in print too far in advance of using it. For example, in a court case, the rules, and in fact, the whole reason we've gone away from the print format of the PSM and the BSM in 2012, I think it was because it wasn't current. And we were faced with licensees who said, but I read the PSM, and yes, but the rules changed. So I think you want to be really cautious about putting something in print, at least without vetting it prior to its use. They're always there. They're live on our website or available through the government site in the case of the regulations, rules, and the Real Estate Services Act.
Wonderful. Thank you guys both for jumping in on that one. Tracy, are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more that's come in. It's also about the website. Is when will RECBC site be ready for this with the new changes, and will we be informed?
Tina, did you want to take that one too, or did you want me to go for it?
You can start and I can jump in.
Okay, so it will be launching in spring, which we're pretty much in right now. So I don't have a definitive date for you yet. Tina might be able to shed a little bit more light on that, but it is coming soon. I mean, the project is, we're doing user testing on our staging site right now, and just really wanting to make sure that we're trying to gather as much information as possible from the users and what we're hearing from them, so that hopefully that search functionality can really improve as we go through the user testing. Tina, did I miss anything?
Well, one piece I would add is that, yes, we will inform you before it goes live. So we want to give you the opportunity to be not kind of caught unawares that the changes have been made. So we'll make sure that managing brokers are given notice that this change will be happening.
Great, thank you, Tina. Tracy, any other questions?
Yeah, there is. I think this is quite similar, but maybe just to reinforce the message, can you post in the chat the link to the regulatory resource index? I cannot find it, but I think it's because it's not ready.
It's not there yet. So it will be coming once the project's launched. So there's no current index online right now, but certainly we, as Tina said, we will keep you informed as to when it's launching.
Great, thank you.
Anything else there, Tracy?
Yes, I have one about the continuing education course, the anti-money laundering course.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question that asks, will the once complete, do licensees need to take it again, or will they need to take this every 2 years per licensing period?
And sorry, who asked that one, Tracy?
That's from Colleen Semple.
Colleen, you know what? I'll follow up with you afterwards and provide you with that information. I don't know that, I'll send you links to the information for our continuing education pieces. Probably easier than me just regurgitating it all here in the webinar. So I hope that works.
There's another one here from Brian.
Yes.
With respect to historical information that changes over time, will there be historical versioning available?
Tina, did you want to field that one?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are keeping historical versions of the PSM and BSM, and we'll have access, of course, with the website updates to when we are making changes to the content. It will not be, there won't be archived versions of the PSM and BSM available for download, but it is something that you can contact RECBC if you are needing information about a specific point in time, what the guidance was. You can contact us and we'd be able to provide that to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tina.
Carmen, I think if you could just confirm, there's been a few questions about this, a copy of this webinar being available. Would you mind just reminding everybody that
it is being
yeah.
recorded. So yes, absolutely, it will be available.
Okay.
And I'll add to that too. We're aiming to have a link to the copy of the webinar in the next issue of Broker's Brief, which would be coming out next week.
I've got another one here. Can RECBC ensure the content can be cut and pasted to send our agents or their clients for information?
I can start with that one. So, I mean, our current knowledge base does permit you to be able to cut and paste. That won't be changing in the new knowledge base, unless I'm missing something. I don't think I have much more to add to that, unless I'm incorrect. Tina, please correct me.
No, you should be able to. And Andrew, if you're having a particular issue, please feel free to send us an email at info@ to let us know what issue you're having so we can look into it. But it should be copy and pasting should work.
Thank you. I think this might be the last one. I recently had an agent transfer to another agency. I had a hard time finding out about what the guidelines and recommendations are for that scenario. Will this type of situation be covered in the knowledge base?
I'm not too certain in terms of what you mean by that scenario. Like if you mean you know, the various different things that need to be filled out to transfer to another brokerage, that will still be available on our website, but won't form part of the knowledge base. If you're talking about guidance related to, you know, a licensee coming to your brokerage or leaving your brokerage, the only thing I can think of is that you might be talking about remuneration and that type of thing. And if maybe they have a deal left at your brokerage and they're going to another, those are the types of things that will be discussed in the guidance, much like the information that you have in the current PSM now. I hope I'm answering that question correctly. It was a little bit broad, but certainly if I haven't covered it off, feel free to send off an email to our PSAs and they can certainly help guide you towards any guidance we might currently have and better answer that question if I didn't do a very good job.
And since we have a PSA right here, why don't I stick my 2 bits in? This is exactly the kind of situation where we say, give us a call if there's something that you're not too sure about in this environment. However, it's also an opportunity for us to point out that your brokerage should have policies and procedures in place that anticipate new licensees coming to your brokerage and licensees leaving. And that could very well include things like the status of listings that a licensee holds at the time they leave, for example, future payment of remuneration after a licensee has left. So it's a moving environment, and it happens regularly. And of course, license transfers, I understand, can now be done online. And so, you know, the managing broker can look to the PSAs for an answer that perhaps brokerage policy is not covering.
Tracy, is that it for our questions?
That looks like that's all. Yes.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you all very, very much for coming. And for those of you that are in the audience that participated in our user testing, I also want to thank you very much for doing so. We really enjoyed the time that we had with you when we were doing that over the past few weeks. So much appreciated. Everybody take care and stay healthy. Thanks so much for joining us today.